Okay, might as well get started, so I'm not holding you guys up. I'm sure you guys are pretty busy. I appreciate you guys coming out. A good turnout, I'm pretty happy about that. This actually is a project I finished back in December. Started in grade, I had to defend it and all that stuff. It's all been done, which is kind of nice. Nice to be past that stage. This presentation now is part of my next part, where I have to kind of present something that I've done through the course, and I'm just going to stick with the same one. I learned a lot while I did it, had a lot of fun. Fun once I got into the research side and started digging into getting the criteria that make an efficient video tutorial. Once I started getting into finding those criteria and then testing those criteria, I really enjoyed that. And I was actually hoping that I could share it. And, so I was kind of glad that I get this part here. Yeah, so I figured before we'll even dive into all those elements that I dug up, I figured I'll show you the categories that they fell under. That way you have it in the back of your mind of where this is heading. Sorry, water already. So I wanted to hit it from 3 different areas. When I present to students, I want to help them learn and retain what I'm teaching. So that's what the cognitive strategies are. As well as I wanted to have some guidelines that I could follow when I'm actually creating these video tutorials. So that's where the video production guidelines kind of fall in. And then I wanted to solidify, ground it back to the art form, or ground it back to the profession. Okay. There's some coffee over here. So yeah, to ground the criteria that I dug up, they fell under the artistic content. So those are the 3 areas that all these criteria are going to fall under. Okay. So I figured I'd just show you the main categories so you can see where we're heading, and then I'll start digging into the guts of this as we move along. So yeah, the plan is we're going to define the word efficient, because right off the bat with a title like that, what do we mean by efficient video tutorials? You know, who's it efficient for and all that. So we better define that. What motivated this project? Obviously, it's part of my master's. But why I chose it as a project to work with obviously goes a lot deeper, so we'll cover that as well. Talk about where these smaller criteria came from, where they were tested, and then I'll come back to those 3 major areas with those criteria attached, and then show how I tested them after the fact. So even though they've been tested once in other people's research, when I bundled them together a different way, I went back and tested them again in that fashion. And then of course the feedback sheets, those blue sheets, I want to grab those before you guys go, because I got to actually write a paper about this. So got to add to that. So let's define that word efficient. I take it from the student's perspective. I want to make it efficient for the students. So I want to make it efficient for their time. We're limited with how much time we have in the classroom with them. They're limited for how much time they have for homework, right? And they're also limited for how much they can retain, right? So I wanted to make this efficient for them with regards to time in that one. Help them remember the lessons, so there's the retention. Okay? How can we help them learn key things of what we teach? Okay? And then link the learning, or those criteria, back to the art form or procedures that we're teaching. Link it back to the art form, or link it back to the profession. So it adds value to what they're learning, so they understand why they're learning these things. Okay, so yeah, this whole idea actually came from a research paper I did before. I was actually building a way to help students who are doing 3D projects to build a support structure for them. You know, when we're not around, you know, maybe we can provide videos or a forum or something like that. And this is still something that's kind of in the back of my mind, because when we're not around, they have a lot of questions. Not to mention that each 3D film seems to be different, so they each have different demands and different requests. So it would be nice to kind of give them something that they can, that we can support them. So that's what sparked the idea of this. And every student that I interviewed and every faculty that I interviewed all made mention of video tutorials, okay? And most of them specifically to YouTube tutorials, okay? So I figured I'm gonna include that in my next research and actually test, are these really efficient? Are these working for the students? Or what isn't, or what is? Okay, so that's where it kind of started from. I actually learned Maya pretty much completely on YouTube. Obviously I've had some help from a lot of you guys, thank you. But we all pick up our tricks off of YouTube. And of course, there's all those YouTube videos that you're like, oh, come on, hurry up, you're too slow, or what are you talking about? This is so irrelevant. So I've obviously had some YouTube videos that I wasn't too pleased with. So I figure out I'm gonna hit those on as well. I also want to improve my teaching. Already I'm noticing that stuff I do in the classroom has changed because of this research project, to be honest. There's a specific theory that we're going to talk about that that's always conscious in my mind when I'm teaching now, and I want to help my students with that. And of course, it's part of my Bournemouth assignment, this particular presentation, so obviously I get a mark for that as well. It's a small part, but there's also a written part that I got to do as well. And that's where the feedback also comes in. All right, so I guess the thing that I like about what I've been doing at Bournemouth was learning how to work with theories and frameworks and methods. I've never really worked with them before. I've always known that people have done research projects and just ignored them. I never knew what they're worth or what you can get out of them. But I like how they ground anything that they come up with. And I'll even talk about how this relates to other people's research. It was. I like that I can take things that people have tested and see the results of those tests, and then just like this project, I ended up taking them, making a new set of lists, and then testing them again. I like that you could do that and get feedback. So I actually have never done that before. It was definitely an eye opener, and as you start working with these things, it really opens your eyes to what works and what doesn't, and how you can test it if you're not sure. I really like that. So yeah, working with video tutorials, it's not a new subject, right? You guys, we all do it. We all have our strategies. So obviously there's been a lot of research out there as well. In total, I probably read about 10 different research papers on it, maybe more. 2 really influenced it, and I'll talk about those 2. And yeah, I wanted to see what other people discovered and what they recommended in their research. So these are the areas that I went through. Instead of having you guys read it, I'll just kind of whip through them, because text is crazy. The first 2 were 2 research projects that I actually really leaned on. One was video versus text, and it was a manufacturing company that were trying to teach about 200 employees, and they weren't sure which way was more efficient, if they use paper documents or if they use videos. And they're talking about the benefits both ways and how they tested it. It was a really good research project to read about. In the end, it was very procedural based and very much about the video production guidelines. So those are the 3 areas that I spoke about earlier up top. So that one really kind of dug in around the production of video tutorials and parts of text that they used that worked more efficiently as well. And I actually was able to incorporate some of those into this as well. The next one is even closer to mine. Sorry, the next one was uTutorial, and this one actually took a bunch of video production type criteria and tested it against videos on YouTube. So very similar to what I did, because I ended up testing my criteria against video tutorials on YouTube. Okay, so it's very similar. Seemed a little bit more one-dimensional as far as I have the 3 categories. They did talk a little bit about some cognitive learning, which started to lean on what I was doing there at the top. But in the end, it ended up relating back to being important for the video production. So make sure you're teaching stuff that's real, stuff that's true. Again, it was more about that instead of how students learn. And that's what I really wanted to dig into. I wanted to help students retain this stuff. So to kind of bulk that top one back up, these are the theories that I got. Now originally those ideas were just very vague. I had just some goals I was trying to meet in this project. And then I went through all these different sources and then put them into different themes, and those actually ended up to be the themes. Right? So here's where I was trying to help students retain the information. I was getting into learning theories and theory of instruction. This was actually a really great book. I enjoyed reading that one. just talks about how the brain works, and I'll actually be touching on one thing that they talked about. And those criteria ended up feeding back into my cognitive strategies. And of course, those are always tested as well, which is nice. Then I wanted to get back to, grounding it back to why we're teaching this stuff in the first place. So I got into the Illusion of Life, or the Animator Survival Kit, right? I started using, looking for, the animation principles. Are people using these in their YouTube videos? And surprisingly, they weren't. So I started to question that. Why am I lost on this one? Why does it seem so obvious, but it's not out there? So I'll actually talk a little bit about how I kind of came back and kept it in and actually solidified it a lot better. And then, of course, from another practical standpoint, Nolinda.com. Okay, they all have they have great video tutorials. They've done a really good job with it. What do they recommend? Right? Let's see what they recommend and how is my stuff going to be different to theirs. So this is where I kind of mined all that in from all those criteria that are going to end up falling into those three categories. So again, we got the three areas: how people learn, how we create the videos to help the students learn, and then how we ground it back with the art form or the profession in that case. After all those criteria, which I'm going to show you actually on the next slide of it is, actually they, not the next slide, next couple slides. After I got all the criteria into these three categories, I wanted to test it before I actually dug in and agreed that these are the lists I'm going to be testing. Because I didn't want to go to all these YouTube videos, test it against every single one of these criteria and find out I don't like the list, right? Or the list doesn't work for some reason. So I kind of went back and I tested it against a framework for learning. And it's an interesting framework because it has a similar idea of what I was looking for. TPACK talks about three different types of knowledge: technology, pedagogical, which is learning, or how people learn, and content. In my case, in our case, it's animation or gaming in that case. So I thought this would be a good thing to compare it against. So let me read how they recommend it. Actually, let me say one more thing, sorry. The cool thing about this particular framework is it's not just about the three types of knowledge. It's how the three types of knowledge interact with each other. That's what I found fascinating, and how it started to mesh with what I was doing. Okay? So the TPACK framework suggests that teachers need to have a deep understanding of each of the above components of knowledge in order to orchestrate technology, pedagogy, and content into teaching. Okay? So it has to do with how they interact. To talk about more how it mixes with ours, you can't create animation without knowing the medium or the technology. So even like a flip book, somebody might have, cool little book, and they, wow, those are neat little images in the bottom corner. You never think of them. Right? If they don't know to flip, they don't know the technology, they don't know the medium. Okay, so it's how the two interact. It's how the content, which is the animation, and the technology interact that makes that possible. Okay, so this started to ground the three areas, and at that point I was like, yeah, I think these areas are going to be good enough. I think they're going to work. Okay, so the cognitive strategies was how the pedagogical knowledge and the technical knowledge interact. The video production guidelines are how the pedagogical knowledge and the contextual knowledge interact. And the artistic context is how technology and content knowledge interact. So that's how they kind of summed up together. So this was the first framework that I tested it up against. And then I'm going to only show you one other theory in detail and touch on one other one. So I'm not, because it gets dry real fast. I'm going to put you guys through. Okay, this is the next one. I tried to liven it up a little bit. Okay, every day is garbage day. For this particular theory, this is the way I see it, and it helped me learn it. Okay, if anyone studied cognitive load theory, this is a great theory. I really enjoyed playing with this one. The human brain is efficient. It quickly decides what is trash and then takes the trash out. Okay? So let's go dig in and see what that means. Okay? Cognitive load theory assumes a limited working memory that stores about 7 elements and operates on just 2 to 4 elements. Now I know me, I can probably only handle 2. Like, I lose interest real fast. So I fall in this category, full feet. So it is able to deal with information no more than a few seconds, with almost all information lost in 20 seconds, unless it's refreshed. So the mind is efficient. It wants to trash stuff, okay? So propositions in working memory take time to process. It's estimated that each new piece of information takes 10 seconds to encode. So I took these different parts of that theory from 2 different people that were testing it, going back as far as that, and then made a new rule out of it. Okay, I call it the 10 to 20 second rule. So you give your students 10 seconds, when you give them a new piece of information, you give them 10 seconds to encode it. Okay, and then you have another 10 seconds to reinforce that, or it's lost. Okay, so that's how I approached this particular criteria. I called it my 10 to 20 second rule. And this one I actually think about a lot when I'm teaching currently. So it's actually not only changing how I do video tutorials, but it's changing how I teach in the classroom. So that's just an example of how I used a theory in the criteria. So I'm going to dig into those criteria and start showing you the details of them. Obviously, the goal for the cognitive strategies are to help the students retain that lesson. Okay? So this is the list from that particular category. Explain the small task before you do that task. I'll actually give you the details of these in a sec. There's your 10 to 20 second rule. Okay, reinforce between 10 to 20 seconds. Repetition, you guys I'm sure all repeat so many times to our students. Various repetition, relation, rules, and eliminate irrelevant content. So let's talk a little bit about them. Break projects into smaller tasks and then explain each small task before you execute it, so they know where they're heading. Okay, kind of similar to the way I throw the 3 categories up there, just so you know which way we're heading. Okay, pace we already spoke about, reinforcing between 10 to 20 seconds rules. And then it's how do we reinforce that? Remember, going back to that theory, right? We leave it at 20 seconds unless it's refreshed. That's where we kick in. Okay? This is where we decide what's important, what do we want our students to retain. Okay? So this is how we reinforce that. You repeat it. So, I mean, already now I've probably mentioned that 10 to 20 second rule 6 times. Okay, so I'm already repeating it just by talking about it. It kind of flows nicely. Just by me talking about it now is another way, a various way of repetition. Okay, so you see how this stuff can flow into each other. Okay, so it gets to a point where, I've already said it now 7 times. It's a lot. It gets annoying, right? Next time you're in class, you're gonna oh crap! I just taught them something new. I gotta reinforce it, right? You're probably gonna hate me for it. So that's actually where relation comes in. When you're related to something that somebody's doing. So, for example, next time you're in class, suddenly you have a picture of your mind in your classroom, and it'll tie that knowledge with this new way of teaching to it. So you're related, in that way you can relate it to something visual. So I'm relating that 10 to 20 second rule to your classroom. So that's another really good way of reinforcing some of this knowledge. Okay. I'm starting to move really fast, but again, I wanted to keep this short, to the point. Rules actually falls from another theory, but I ended up using this with cognitive load theory as well. So this has to do with feature analysis theory. So rules lead to better learning and retention than memorization, because rules gives a simpler description of the phenomenon, so less information must be learned. So if your mind will only work with 2 things, or at least mine, we can only work with 2 things at a time. It's not just 2 words at a time. It's 2 ideas or 2 things at a time, right? So if you can get them to learn a set of rules, that's only 1 thing. Okay, so this is how you can bundle things together, feed it back to them, and they'll be able to retain or recall that knowledge a lot easier when they learn those rules. So these are things that really changed a lot on what I teach. I started incorporating rules in my class time as well. I've never used them before. I've seen them before. I just never realized how handy they could be. Eliminating irrelevant content, that's a simple one. Why give your brain more trash to deal with? But it's also, don't, and I'm sure I've been guilty of this, where you'll start to teach them something and, this is going to be really cool, but you don't need it for this project. I've done that so many times. I'm so guilty. So I'm trying to eliminate that from my teaching, and it's also good to eliminate it from your video tutorials if you want them to be efficient. You don't want to waste their time with stuff that they don't need, and you want them to retain. You want to pick which information you want them to retain, and it's not going to be that. Right? You want them to retain something that's going to help them. So these are the ones I really dug into. I had a lot of fun with these ones. I might as well move on to some of the things that you guys are probably a lot more familiar with. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with those ones too, just maybe not how they work together. I don't know. Show the end result first. This one I'm working on more for myself as well. This one, so the previous one breaks them into small categories and then shows the end result of each sub-project. And this one is showing the entire project. So I got this one off of lynda.com. They believe in that one very strongly. Zoom and crop, we all do this one where you're zooming in. Just by teaching Maya, when I did a rigging tutorial, and just by using it, when you're zooming into the foot, you're rotating it, or you're painting weights, right away, it's already a big screen for the students, so it's already zoom and crop just naturally, just by using the software. So we're kind of lucky that way. But it also does include other things. And I have a list actually coming up on that as well. Draw visual attention to an important item. Actually, let's go through them. Small parts at a time, I gotta remember this. Draw visual attention to things, draw audible attention to things. Okay. Teach at a conversational pace. That's a big one for me too. Still working on it. And rehearse before creating the video. Okay, that definitely helps. So let's show the end result first. That's the whole, whatever the end project is that you want them to create, to finish. Show that first, then break it down into small parts and show the beginning of each of those. Okay, so that one came from lynda.com. Zoom crop we just talked about. I threw a couple of rules in there because it helps us remember. You can see the menus, make sure that people can see the menus. Okay, so it's not only about seeing where you're painting weights, but it's also so they can see the menus. And show enough surrounding areas so they know where those menus are. And never act or do anything off screen. In my tutorial, I ended up doing that. I caught it when I was going back and editing it. And what I did is I just re-recorded a part and pieced it in, and it worked out a lot better that way. So I put those rules together for the zoom and crop. Visual intention, this always works well, just throw big arrows at things. I do this all the time, right? Works in class. Draw audible attention, right? So now you're just saying it. Remember this, it's important, right? There's a test on this, remember that. Okay, teach at a conversational pace. I actually just forgot what the speed of that was, whoops. I was trying to remember that just a second ago, but it's gone. But I actually got actual stats on what they consider, what's considered to be a conversational pace. And what I did is every video tutorial that I tested, I actually had to go back and check how fast they were talking. That took forever, but eventually I got those. I figured out a way to do that. And then rehearse before creating the video. I found creating video tutorials a lot of work. Right? It's not just as straightforward as recording yourself if you want to make them efficient like this. What I did when I created that video tutorial is I recorded it. Well, originally I was just planning to record it 3 times. I did it 5 times. The 4th one is actually the one I kept. And then I kind of pieced together parts that weren't working and put them back in. So it did take a lot of time. But that's how I did rehearse. So the first 2 I threw away because I was stuttering and oops, I swear, better dump that one, So definitely rehearse before you create it. It gets your pace better, as well as stops you from stuttering, if you stutter like I do. What's that?
It would draw an audible attention to portrait swearing.
Yeah, that would make them remember.
Do it 5 times.
Yeah. So the artistic context is actually even simpler than the other ones. We all know the animation principles. So I was looking for anything like that or anything to do with weight, right? Anything that draws it back to the art form that we're teaching, right? It gives relevance back to what we're teaching. So this is actually what made it into that thesis paper. Including the artistic relation to the lesson has 2 main benefits to making video tutorials efficient. Cognitive relation and professional relevance. So we just talked about the relevance, so it grounds that learning and why they're learning it. But when a student knows squash and stretch, they may not be seasoned enough to pull it off every time, but they got the concept. They can recall that knowledge, right? If you attach a process that you're teaching them how to do squash and stretch, when they recall the squash and stretch knowledge, that procedure comes with it, right? It links the 2 knowledge together so that it's easier to recover that information. So including that artistic context, whatever it is, in our case it's the animation principles, when they recall it, these procedures can come with it. So it does reinforce it. It's another one of those relative repetition cognitive parts that we were talking about earlier. Okay. So yeah, now I did test this. I'll talk a little bit about in a sec how I tested it. When I did test it though, I was really shocked that it wasn't being used that much. They weren't talking about weight, they weren't talking about squash and stretch even. I did walk cycles, rigging, and I did some terrain. You'll see it in a second. So I was evaluating all these different YouTube videos, and they weren't talking about the art form, which kind of surprised me. So I wasn't quite sure if I was on the right track with that one. And then I came across, I was digging, and I came across this particular article that really helped. Encoding specificity also includes context. One study, scuba divers learned a word list, either on shore or underwater. On subsequent free recall tasks, learners recalled more words when they were in the same environment as the one in which they learned the words than when they were in the other environment. So if they learned a set of words while they were diving, and they were back diving again, they can recall those words a lot easier. If they learned a set of words on shore, and they're on shore, they can recall those words again easier. But when they swapped the 2, it started to fall apart. Okay, so I found that really interesting. So that started to solidify what I was going after. What's that?
Water keeps filling their lungs when they start.
When they start to recite it. Yeah, I actually wondered that myself. Still like the article though. Anyway, so again, I talked about this. So when teaching a process, relate that process back to something like squash and stretch. It's exactly what I just spoke about. Right. So. Yeah, so I liked it, so that you can reinforce that knowledge, as well as it does give meaning to what you're teaching, right? So it's kind of like a double win just by adding that. And then, no, I just talked about that. Okay, so, where did I skip one? Hold on a second. No, okay. Yeah, so we'll go to here. So this is the research I actually did. So there's those 2 sets of criteria that you saw, and I actually have them here. And I have them on cards too for you guys if you want them. And I know you can't really read that really very well, but you know, you can see the size of the list, right? There's, you know, a number of items there and there. The importance is that these all came from somewhere that had been tested, except for obviously, you know, who tested squash and stretch? Well, we all know it works, right? So the artistic part maybe wasn't tested officially, but you know, we all know they're there. The other criteria, both for video production and cognitive knowledge, those were all tested through different research projects. So now that I had this new list, I went out and tested 25 videos and just saw if people were using these. And I just took notes of when they used them in their videos, and you know, were they 20 seconds apart and all that. 10 were based on a walk cycle done in Maya. 10 were done on rigging, a humanoid character. And 5 were done on using terrain with a bump map. I tried to get 10 with this, but they all seemed too different. It was hard to get 10 similar type YouTube videos. So I said, okay, 5 will have to do. So it was actually really interesting. Like I said earlier, well, they gets into crazy detail. I won't put you guys through that. Yeah, this is where art was least used, and this is actually what I put in my thesis paper. Art was the area least used. In fact, it was used only once in the rigging videos. Rigging is a very technical process, and the video lessons were procedural. In the walk cycle videos, instructors were using similar rigs and talking about weight and other animation principles. So you have 2 different lessons going on, one about rigs and one about a walk cycle. In the walk cycle, they'll talk about the art form. But in rigs, where they're using that rig, they won't talk about the art form, right? So I found that really interesting out in the videos that I analyzed. So this demonstrates the importance of this research. When video tutorials are made without context, they show how to perform a task, but lack the context of why they're performing that task. So that's how I kind of summed all that up. Okay. Then thinking about it a bit more, once I actually did create a video using these as well, and then I came back and I added this to that same thesis. Ironically, the beauty of this research lies in the art element. It is 1/3 of the criteria that this video will be evaluated by. The other 2 criteria are transferable, meaning that the animation art element can be replaced with other art elements, like photography, for example. So if you take the first 2 elements, your cognitive strategies and your video production strategies, you leave them alone, you unplug the animation principles and plug in photography principles, right? So now the strategy can be used to create efficient video tutorials for photography. Okay, so this is how this thesis kind of finished up for me. I found that it seemed that it worked pretty well that way. So this is comparing my rigging video against existing rigging videos. One with weight painting, or one's with weight painting, one's without weight painting. Mine did have weight painting. Okay. The videos that were out on YouTube were 40 seconds or 40 minutes long, 20 seconds, and they only used art once. They only talked about art once. Counting everything that they used out of those 3 categories, they used it on average 25 times per video. When I went and checked the other videos that didn't have weight painting, okay, it was 27 minutes long, and they would use the 3 major areas 15 times. So they didn't use the art element at all. Okay, so that averaged out using 3 major areas to all the rigging videos. They used it on average 17 times per video. Okay, when I created my video, obviously I was very conscious about these 3 areas. Right? That was the whole goal of making this video, to test these. So I ended up using the element 74 times. I used the art element 11 times. And surprisingly, the time actually didn't inflate so much. I guess by removing that irrelevant content, brings down the time, so it actually worked out. So comparing apples and apples, which are the 2, I actually went down in time. But it is even comparable with the other rigging tutorials without weight painting. So essentially I did 3 research projects. One is to find those criteria. Then I went back and tested them if they were being used out there. And then I just see how would I do it? Would this work for me? And would the clock go nuts on me? I thought I'd just try it. So that's why I created that video. Again, I learned a ton doing that video. I'll probably end up doing it again. You always learn. So that was pretty much my end result. So using these criteria actually worked really well. They seem to work for me, and they actually are affecting how I teach in class. So I think that's all I got. I do have a video I could show you, but I'm not going to put you guys through further. No, I can show you parts of it. But it's 40 minutes, or 29 minutes. So actually, just in case, I made some time of how I came up with using it. So Yeah, so here's an example of how I just kind of related to one of those sources. So in this case, this is actually at the weight painting stage. And I'm showing how this elbow obviously doesn't work right. Okay. Oh, actually, no, this is showing zoom and crop, so you could be able to see all the menus and stuff. Zoom out, right? Talk about how you're going to approach weight painting. And of course, I'm going to throw some rules at them. Okay. Test the motion, remove unwanted influences, test the motion again, and a pose, and then adjust the influences to match that pose. So I used zoom and crop there, as well as I used a set of rules that can help them create that. I think again I do a similar thing where I actually, where is it? Oh, right. Where I actually put it against pose 25. So I'm actually testing it against one of those images of us. Pulled it from the book, obviously. So we're talking about weight painting on the foot. Okay, and then we're going to compare it against one of the poses. There you go. Talking about how it's a harsh cut, and then how we're going to weight paint to make that cut happen, because obviously it doesn't happen there. Okay, so it's nice to bounce back and forth and show them why they're doing what they're doing. In the beginning, okay, have it come into showing them. This is where I didn't show the entire end process. This is one of the things I wanted to add, which is probably one of the things I will do whenever we do this video. I didn't show the end result of the finished break, which I should have, but I did show where we're heading, broken down into, actually where we're heading overall, but I should have showed a video overall as well. And what we're gonna do, oh, actually there's the steps that I used with you guys. Efficient use of time, help remember the steps, and efficient rig for the animator, right? So I had some goals that I was meeting that's very similar to what I did here. And I just used, I used Maya and just jammed the text in there and just turned it on in my good old render layers, or layers. Just some ideas. It was a fun project. I really did enjoy this, and I was glad I had the opportunity to come back and kind of present it back. I don't know if you guys have any questions, if you want to just go ahead and do the feedback.
Look here.
Yeah.
You got to remember that most of the stuff when you're on YouTube or whatever, it's technical, because they're showing you the tools. This is how the tools work. So you're probably not going to get a whole lot of artistic stuff in there. So it is going to be one of those things that when you are doing something very specific, such as, say you're doing the rigging of the foot, you probably get away with, just the bending of the toe. I usually like, can I get a nice little twist in there? Because how we work, we do a lot of pivoting, and there's lots of weight on the ground. We're going to pivot, and therefore that's something that needs to be related to the students as to why I need those extra controls. So overall, you're probably going to find for a lot of these things, it's going to be dry. But there's going to be some things that here's why you need to do this, because it relates to real life. Right. And here's what, and I guess this is where, if you had a good example of something, a film where you can actually see somebody animating something, doing something neat, and it says, here's how we can do that, goes back. So yeah, that actually works nicely for an example, and here's why we need to get that into the rig. I need controls. The more stuff that we have, that's going to work. But I understand, the point I'm getting across. I'm not surprised that you're not going to find lots of art in these things, because technically it's technical.
It is. It's very procedural.
Yeah. So basically, this is how an engine works. This is how it goes. Who cares? But if you say, if you're drag racing, here's how you can increase the horsepower and do that by doing this. So there's related. So we deal with the art form. That's what the students bring into it, because we teach the principles in doing that one. And once they got the technical stuff under their belts, then it makes a lot of sense that they can then apply it and everything. But I think having some good examples as to why do we have a rig or something doing this way? What tools am I building in that's going to give me more options to do some cool stuff? That's going to make a big deal.
Did your tutorial include controls?
No, it
You
didn't.
just saw bones and.
Yeah, in fact, I didn't even get to I skipped the IK part, which surprised me. I had it on my list and didn't get to it.
So is this something that you're building for, as an example for your master's program? Or is it
Actually,
something that's out there for instructional purposes?
I actually just did it for myself,
Right.
just for me to learn to try. Really, I was just testing this as well as, trying out some of my skills on
And are
that.
you presenting as part of your paper and part of your courses?
I made it available to them for that paper. But like I said, it's gonna be something that I revisit, because I got some great feedback. There's some things I wanna change on my rig, there's some things I wanna change on the presentation. And it was more of a learning experience for me, a way for me to learn. But going back to the art form, I do agree, it is very procedural. And I didn't expect a lot, but out of 25 videos, to only hear it said once, I found that a little extreme. I would imagine at least once per video, not once total, right? So I think my goal was at least to find one in there, and kind of like what you're saying when it's on weight and you're pivoting.
Yeah.
So I would have counted that as relating it back to the art form. But I was surprised how little they did of that.
I think the people that want to learn Maya, I'm going to use that as an example, is that, people want to animate everybody figures, so you might get people who are experienced animators that are learning a new tool to apply all the stuff that they're going to be using it for, which means they need to get hold of new tools. You're going to get novices that go, I love animation, I want to try, I can do it. If I can get hold of the software, I too can make X-wing fighters fly all over the place, or make T-Rexes do whatever they're doing. That's what we had years ago. But anyways, it is one of those things that a lot of people assume that if they have the tools, they can make the artistic leap.
Yeah.
And then you find out they need to study this
It's
stuff.
not there.
Some people have it naturally, most people don't. But again, going back, most of the, you said it yourself, is that it's technical. This is how the tools work. Here's how you put your, the Tinker Toy together. But what you do with it is what's going to be the artistic part. So I see them not really dealing with that, and that's always going to be the frustration.
Mhm.
But after looking at all this stuff, I'm thinking, showing some good examples as to how they relate, and that makes a lot more sense when people are actually applying the art. They can see the connection
Right.
and everything. But if I'm going to my tutorial, I don't expect anybody to show me, this is the principles of squash and stretch. It's inertia. This is how the physics work.
You should
they're not
go.
gonna, that's what school's for.
Right.
And stuff like this. The main thing is like, what tools do I use to make it look that way?
I'm just wondering, the background of the people making the videos that you sourced on YouTube, are they from the industry, or are they just hobbyists that are putting out their own videos? And,
Good question.
Yeah.
When I went through,
You go on.
there it is. Okay, this ugly slide, the one I was really avoiding. Hard, I was really trying to avoid. There's actually 2 spreadsheets like this that break down all those criteria and how I found them. But if you look at this particular person, they have 530,000 subscribers. Okay, so they must be doing something right with that. In fact, one of them, I believe it's the orange, I believe it's 32,000. One of them was lynda.com. It wasn't the #1, which surprised me.
Are they free to watch? Or?
Yeah, on YouTube. These are all YouTube videos. Yeah, so I didn't really dig into the background of them. So good question. I think that would have been really valuable for me to know months ago. Thank you. But I was very conscious of what their subscription lists were. I even dug into Thumbs Up, which ended up to be just a can of worms. Oh, it's, I mean, you got such a pretty voice. All right, so it got really detailed. Positive comments, negative comments, constructive comments, they're all in here. So what I found the one to be the more practical information I was getting from them were more of their subscription lists and other videos that they were creating. But for the stats, the subscription lists were the ones that I leaned on the most. So yeah, so even looking at the rigging one, 45,000 people were looking at that particular video. And that particular video used the 3 criteria 32 times. So you could see they have a large subscription rate and they have a high number of using the criteria. So that was the interesting relation that I found. Better start thinking about that. Yeah.
Curious.
Any other questions?
Just maybe an observation. I really appreciate how a takeaway I've got from this is kind of a reinforcement that it's not just efficient video tutorials for teaching software, but also it's just efficient pedagogy.
Yeah.
The 10 and 20 second range. I mean, somehow that slipped by me a lot of classes. So it's like a good reminder, and that type of thing. So, that's
So
really
yeah, like I
cool.
said, when I started really testing these things and really learning about how they behave, right away I was very conscious about it while teaching classes. It definitely changed how I approach different classes. Yeah, I found the same thing. Thanks.
Yeah.
It's fine. I think there was a lot of stuff that was doing automatically, and then find out when we do the teaching courses that it kind of reinforces that. Explain what you're going to do at the beginning here, which is the overview. Teach what you're going to do, and then review it at the end. Here's what we covered. Here's what we've done. So make sure that they understand the principles and stuff like that.
I figured you guys were using almost all of these, if not all. Like that was my thinking going into this. I wasn't, but I think the understanding of why they work is what would open my eyes, and that's why I wanted to share this, because it really kind of tied it in together really nicely for me. So it's not that I wasn't using, well, maybe a lot of them I wasn't using. For example, speaking at a conversational pace, I get excited and I go faster and faster and faster. My classes know, just slow down. I tell them that from day one, slow me down because I go nuts. Right? I get excited, I enjoy what I do. And it makes me go faster. So now I'm always conscious of being, at a casual pace because I know it'll help them learn. Right? So it's tied it down that way for me.
Yeah, I think we do stuff by intuition, and then only when you're in front of people do you say, that's not working.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is. Move too fast, that's
So thanks again. I really appreciate the support, guys.
Okay,
Thank
thank you.
Thank you.